the idea that somehow this NCAA streak has to continue on throughout my entire career is a big lie. It's not.
Welcome to Inside the Coaching Mind, conversations on leadership, coaching, and team building. Your host, Terry Pettit, led the University of Nebraska Cornhusker volleyball team from 1977 to 1999 and coached Nebraska's first ever national championship in 1995. Today, Coach Pettit mentors coaches, writes books, and gives presentations to corporations and businesses on leadership and team building. I'm Dave Young, producer of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And now, let's jump right into the episode. Here's Terry Pettit's interview with Colorado State University head women's volleyball coach, Tom Hilbert.
Well, I'm Terry Pettit, the host of Inside the Coaching Mind, and our guest today is my good friend, Tom Hilbert, who's the answer to a Jeopardy question. If the statement was, this volleyball program has been in the NCAA tournament for 25 consecutive years, Coach Hilbert, what would the answer be?
The answer would be Colorado State University.
Yes, but as Alex would remind you, you have to put that in the form of a question.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, which program is Colorado State University? And
yes,
it's important to note that the first two of that 25 were under Rich Feller.
Yes, so. and Rich went from Colorado State to an assistant coach of the national team, then went to Cal and built a very strong program there. But I'm really eager for this morning. There are a lot of things that I'm familiar with Colorado State. I've probably seen Colorado State volleyball play as much or more than any program I've seen in certainly the last 20 years. So I'm very familiar with it. The consistency is remarkable. But there are a lot of things that I don't know. I know that you came from Norman, Oklahoma. I don't know how you got involved in volleyball. I think the first time we met was in the early to mid 80s when you were an assistant coach for Miles Papps. But how did you get that position? Where did you begin?
Well, at that time, back in the late 70s, early 80s, Oklahoma was one of 8 states that had boys high school volleyball. So I got involved with I played it in high school, and I got involved. I was a setter. I got involved with Peggy McCaw and Jess Cooper, who ran a club out of Tulsa. And, Peggy McCaw really developed a lot of good male players out of the state of Oklahoma, including her son, Chip. But I was involved in that club. Then I started a club with my girlfriend, who was a player at the University of Oklahoma. And there were no girls clubs in Oklahoma at the time. And so I started that. And then a few years later, Miles at Oklahoma started another club, and he was coaching younger players. And so we kind of combined resources. That's how we met. And then, I've been coaching the University of Oklahoma men's club team, sharing facilities with Miles in the old field house there at Oklahoma. Grew up in Norman, knew a lot of people there. And there was a point where Miles' assistant at the time, who was Brad Sandin, got a head coaching job with about 3 weeks until the season started. And Miles and I were on a club tournament trip to Chicago, and he and I talked, and I agreed to be the interim assistant coach at Oklahoma in 1984. And just for that season. And then I would graduate from college and he would open the position up. And after that season, I liked it. He liked me, liked the things I was doing. And so I stayed there. And I do remember,
I wasn't aware of the playing background. And tell us a little bit about Miles. Miles was an All-American volleyball player for Long Beach State. For 2 years, he coached the men at Long Beach State, was one of the best players, certainly in the United States, played on world championship teams.
Yep.
Um,
True. And
and
Miles, he played, even when I started working for him, he was in his late 30s. He was playing in the old IVA. And he was, and then he would play at USAV Nationals. And I think he's one of these people that's been the MVP of almost every age group in USAV Nationals throughout the course of his life, up through the 60s. And he was just an unbelievable player. And it always struck me because we would go watch, for example, this is one example. We went to watch a national team match in Dallas right after the '88 Olympics. And we went to the VIP reception after the match was over, and Karch Karai comes up and talks to Miles. And then Karch Karai tells me at that reception that Miles was one of his heroes growing up as an indoor player. So he was just an unbelievably good player, fundamentally sound in every way, could play every position, and had great respect from players across the country from, Rudy Sawara and that Al Skates and that group who all played with him, down to Karch and some of the great ones that we all remember.
and Miles could have been like the stand-in for Gary Cooper in High Noon. He's kind of a stoic figure.
Yes.
Very even-tempered, and yes, I always thought if I was putting together the ideal staff, that Miles would be a great recruiter, because at that time we really valued home visits, the going into a home and meeting the parents. And I have to think Miles was wonderful at that. This guy walked in and looked like a 6'5", 6'6" cowboy, and he could really relate to moms and dads. I thought he was an exceptional recruiter.
Yeah, he really was. And you described him exactly right. He was like a very, he was just like your uncle who you loved to hang out with as a kid, who takes you fishing and that kind of stuff. He was just a tremendous down-to-earth guy.
And what was your role when you first began as an assistant at Oklahoma?
Well, when he hired me, I do, not that I'm tooting your horn, but I do want to say this. You were in the conference with us in the Big 8 conference, and he said, I want to be like Nebraska. And one of the things he wanted to do was market and promote the program so that we would have more. So it became more of a legitimate, sport at the University of Oklahoma. And he challenged me to sell season tickets, and he challenged me to get 500 students at a match. And I was actually able to do that before I left Oklahoma. And that was a big deal back then, to get 500 students at a match at the University of Oklahoma, because it just wasn't a really well-known part of the sport culture in Norman. And so he really liked what I would do there, and I would work very hard. I went after some sponsorships for him. I do remember this. We wanted to do the serving contest for free pizza between games 2 and 3. And I went out and got that secured, made the target, did it all, and then didn't realize, but I actually had to execute it between games 2 and 3. So while Miles was in the locker room talking adjustments, I was running around with a giant pizza. You know what I mean? But that's the way it was in those days. And we accomplished some things, and we got more people to come to games, and it ended up being a decent environment there.
What did you learn? What was your takeaway from being mentored under Miles?
Well, I think from a coaching standpoint, he was very much into fundamentals and making sure that every player did things right. He said, if we recruit really physical athletes and we teach them to play the game in a simple way, he was not complex. He didn't run a lot of different things and a lot of fast tempo stuff. He wanted to be very simple, but do it with kids that could do it high in the air. And if you do that, you're going to win a lot of games. And as it turned out, we did win a lot of games. And, obviously Nebraska beat us most of the time. But again, we were trying to match Nebraska physically and had some success against you guys toward the end of my career.
Mm-hmm. And you thought so much of Miles that when you and Leslie had your own child,
that's right,
you named her Miles.
We named her Miles, yeah, and it was after we call him Big Miles, and she was Little Miles, and she's met him several times.
And 2 years ago, your daughter, your and Leslie's daughter Miles, was in the recruiting process, deciding where she wanted to go. She's also a jumper in track, mm-hmm. and she chose to go to Western Colorado University in Gunnison, mm-hmm. where it's probably minus 30 degrees this morning. Mm-hmm. But how did watching your own daughter playing volleyball, did it impact you as a coach?
No doubt. It impacted me as a coach in terms of, more than anything, I got to see firsthand how a young person feels when they are being coached, when they're being judged, so to speak, when they're going through this process of trying to crack a lineup and play. The recruiting process, it was unbelievable what I learned there, because there were times when she was, during her junior year, back in the rules at that time, she was going to call coaches, and she was terrified. I mean, absolutely terrified. And you begin to realize what an anxiety-ridden process this can be for some of these young people. And we just assume it's something that everybody does. And we take, 100, in those days, there were 50 to 100 phone calls in a recruiting season. And just making one for her was very difficult to do. So it gave me a new look at that part of the process. Uh-huh. And we let her recruiting, we really weren't aggressive as parents, her mom and I. We let her kind of go through it and be who she was and see what kind of attention she attracted. And I thought that we probably could have gotten more people to be interested in her had we pushed, but we didn't. We just let it kind of happen. And she ended up actually at a university that she really loves.
Right. And her first year there, she competed in both volleyball and track. This year, those seasons would parallel each other.
And she has decided to do only track, and she is. I think she's very gifted at it, but more than anything, she loves the culture of track, and she loves competing in a race. She loves, the type of training that they do. And she really, I think it hurt her to do this, but she came to me at one point last spring and said, I love volleyball, but I think I love track more, and I don't believe that I can do them both. So she decided to go to track.
And in volleyball, she played a lot her freshman year.
I was starting libero for most of the year.
Yeah, starting. So you don't go to 25 consecutive NCAA tournaments without having an exceptional staff through the years. A lot of your former assistant coaches became successful head coaches. Debbie Buchanan at Idaho, Ken at Northern Arizona, Melissa Stokes at Missouri State, Jesse Mahoney, who was successful at Denver and then successful at Colorado. You've also had Moritz, who's the beach coach at South Carolina. Former player Angela Knopf has been a successful beach player and beach coach. Was someone's potential to be a head coach a critical factor in who you hired as an assistant coach?
I think that it was because I knew that there was a point, especially after Melissa Stokes moved on and was successful at Missouri State, that people saw me as someone who could help them and mentor them. And then I attracted some really talented people who wanted to come work for me. And to me, it's always been a deal where, I think there are two different kinds of coaches when they start to look for assistants. One are the people who want to look for someone who's part of their coaching family, so that they will have very similar thoughts about the game, similar strategies and similar ways of teaching, and a similar technical package. And then there's me, who is in this other camp of, I would like to hire someone who can bring something new to our program, who can add value. And it doesn't matter their age or whatever. If someone's good, you should let them do what they do well. And I've always felt that was important. And then when people come in, I'm generally going to know if they want to be a head coach. And I actually want that. Whereas I think, again, there are some people who don't want that, but I want it. I want people to move on. I like turnover in my assistant coaching ranks. Some, not a ton, but I want people who will add something new, and who are, through, whether it's recruiting or whether it's, what they add tactically, how well they teach. And then, from that point, they'll generally have a chance to move on. And I'd like to help them do that.
I think you were touching on talent there. You have two assistant coaches now who one day will probably be head coaches, Adriana and Emily. Can you talk a little bit about them and what you think their unique talents are?
Well, I'll start with Emily. She's associate head coach. She is a really engaging person, a good relator to all of the players. And on top of that, very professional and I would say she's the hardest working assistant I've ever had. She really understands the recruiting process and how to manage a whole cadre of recruits and everything. The key is recruiting hard like she does, and reaching out and developing relationships. The key is also identifying who are the best players for you to recruit. Not always how you recruit, but who you recruit. I think that Adriana she's also an extremely hard worker, very intelligent, and she's come in and really is a great relator too. So I have two assistants who are really good with the players. I can give them both a lot of autonomy in the areas that we're in. Emily does first contact, where she's teaching serve, receive, and defense. Adriana's doing a lot of attacking stuff, works with middles and controls our blocking. And Adriana is also really good at the technical side. She can do all the video breakdown, understands how all that equipment works. And, for a head coach in his 60s, I need someone like that. She could code data volley, for example. I could never do that. So, they both have unique talents. I give them both a lot of autonomy. They're both very good with the players. And I think that's important.
And yeah, I've walked into your practice 20 years ago, and I walked in last week. What's changed? How has Tom Hilbert's role changed during practice from 20 years ago?
I kind of 20 years ago, I tried to inject energy all the time. And now I want the energy to kind of develop organically, and I only inject when I feel like it's needed. But I try to create a culture among the players and an expectation of them, their standards being very high, and their communication and processing and really pushing energy into the practice. that all needs to come from the players. If it doesn't, I will inject, but generally they handle that pretty much, and I sit back and watch. I try to teach. I rather than barking things out all the time, I will occasionally bark out things, but a lot of what I do is pulling players aside and, you know, individually telling them, I'd like you to do this. We need to watch this, that kind of thing.
This coming weekend, Colorado State will play its first volleyball match in 14 months. And you also had two key players, Brianna Runnels being a returning player, certainly can play at an All-American level, a senior, but opted out because of COVID for the fall training. And then you had a transfer come in who looked like she would play a significant role as a middle blocker. And she opted out. And as a coach, you know, if you put what coaches want, coaches try to control things, control what we can control. But as everybody knows, that's not part of the deal during COVID. So how do you handle this? How did you handle those situations when you found out that your most experienced and perhaps your best player was not going to be there in the fall, and then a transfer that really had never been a part of the Colorado State system?
Well, you know, it's challenging to face things like that. Coaches want to control their entire environment. And, you know, once COVID hit, and it seemed like every month something was being taken away, something was being changed. I just sort of gave in to this idea that I'm not going to have control. And when I took over in the fall, you know, those opt-outs were still on the team until the point where they called the season, and that's when they gave the opportunity for everybody to opt out. And had four players actually do it. The other two were graduating seniors who chose to do it as well. I just shifted my focus to doing the things I could control, which is develop the younger players on the team and go through that practice segment and try to keep them engaged and try to give them an experience that they came here for. And then when we started back up after Christmas, I really looked at it, and I promise I did this. I said, I'm going to go in there and pretend like this is my first year with this group of coaches, with this group of players, and just say, this is what I have. What would I do if this was my first year as a coach? And I would look at every player equally. I wouldn't, you know, hold anything against a player for an opt-out or whatever. I would just go in there and say, I'm going to compare everybody's gifts and everybody's talents and put together a lineup in the way that I see fit. And I think that's the fair way to do it. And I think, you know, you can look at all the opt-outs and all the things that have happened during COVID and pass judgment on some of it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just go into this like I'm the new coach here. And, you know, it's been 14 months since any of these people have played a match. And let's put a lineup out there that's going to work and see how good we can be.
And everybody has had to deal with COVID. So, you know, you don't have to be a coach to have gone through these things. But what are some of the unique things that have happened this year? What are the unique challenges of going on the road, of how many times, you know, I don't know how many times a week you're tested. If the manager would go out on a Saturday night and be asymptomatic but test positive, the whole program shuts down. Mm-hmm. How does that impact your players?
Well, we had a nice little practice run of it in the fall, and we did very well until the very end, and then we had some irresponsible behaviors which caused a little outbreak on our team. they learned a lesson there, I believe. And I think, we had discussed this at length with, us as coaches and with our players, that we're going to create this kind of mini bubble. And we have certain responsibilities that we must adhere to. And there are going to be some things out of our control still, but we really have to take this seriously. And, we challenged our players to do it, and we told them we know that things can happen, but by all means we have to be responsible, and getting the players to talk about it and getting the players to admit, okay, we did do some irresponsible things on Halloween weekend. Those are the kind of things that they needed to hear and they needed to say to each other. And hopefully it's going to help us stay healthy. Now we're testing 3 days a week. And we are, they're probably in half of their classes are virtual. They are doing the right things in terms of masking and social distancing and that kind of thing. So I hope that we end up having very few cases, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Tom, how can an administration help a coach during this situation? What's the most beneficial thing? An athletic director, a senior women's administrator, what can they do to help you?
I think the best thing they can do is be very transparent and honest throughout the entire process, get information to us quickly and often. And I think they have to help us. And then it's not just the administration, it's the public health people and the upper administration at a university. They have to help us with communication. Because if we're not getting information quickly and efficiently, we can't pass it on. And we are the ones who have to manage the athlete's experience. They don't have to. All they do is make decisions. And so they have to get that information to us quickly and understand that our job throughout this entire thing has been to motivate people and keep people excited about the process. And so you can't do that if you don't have up-to-date, reliable information.
You've always had great attendance at CSU, and it's a fun place to play. What's it going to be like for these players when they go into this weekend? I don't know are you going on the road to Air Force or?
No, we play Air Force at home, and I got that question in our open media thing yesterday too. And it's like, everybody wants to know what it's going to be like to play without any fans, since that's been such a signature mark of what this program is about, is this community following that we have and that we're constantly working on. And the answer to that is, we're not going to have it, obviously. So I think that the players have to now sort of hone into why they play in the first place. Okay. If the only reason they play is to go play in front of fans, they're going to have some problems. But I don't think that that's true. I do think that this is allowing players to attach themselves to a real love of the game and love of competing. And I think they're going to have to learn to really generate their own energy. And, so far in practice, they've been doing it. We've been having some really fun competitive practices. And I think hopefully what this does is really get players to attach themselves to why they play the game.
I know personally, the first match of every season, even when I had several returning players, I kind of felt like Wilbur and Orville Wright must have felt when they pulled that crate out to Kitty Hawk. And I always wondered if the team would fly. Mm-hmm. do you still have, is there still that excitement and anxiety before you play that first match?
There still is, and it's, I've tried to get over this, but I'm kind of a glass half empty kind of guy at the beginning of every season. I tend to really see what our faults are more than what our positives are. But I do believe this, that I don't think you really know who your team is until you start playing other people, and we've been going, multiple months and many, many practices just playing each other. And it is, we're going to have so many more questions answered after this weekend and after the following weekend that'll really help us as coaches move on down the line, because there's a certain point where we're just sort of treading water. And now once you start playing people, it reveals things that need to be revealed.
Could Colorado State's success be a detriment to a head coach in this aspect? Could you feel like there's 48 teams will advance to an NCAA tournament? Normally there's 64. 25 years in a row, Colorado State's gone to the tournament. Could that influence poor decisions when you've got COVID and so many other things going on in this season? Could that create more anxiety for a coach who was trying to defend something?
Yes, I think that it's something that I've thought a lot about how I really need to remove myself from that kind of thinking, because this is really a developmental season. This would have been a developmental rebuilding season anyway. We lost 5 starters. So I really have to look at this season as a developmental season. And I think the idea that somehow this NCAA streak has to continue on throughout my entire career is a big lie. It's not normal, nor does it have to. My job is to go into practice every day and try to make people better. And sometimes not being successful gives you a more clearer path. So I have to remove myself from it. But I think the answer to your question is yes, that can really, I think, be a load on a coach. And it can be a load on players too, because I'm telling you, the dialogue that goes on in this program over the years, since probably 2008, has been, we want to be good keepers of this program. We want to keep this streak going. We feel like it's, our way of serving the people who came before us. That's put a lot of pressure on players too, and because it isn't just about that. It's about going out every day and making yourself a better volleyball player, learning how to compete, learning how to deal with pressure and interference in life. That's what we're doing here. And I feel bad sometimes when I hear the players talk about, we have to keep this streak going. We don't want to, here's the quote that I always hate: we don't want to be the class that ended the NCAA streak. You know what I mean? It's like, you shouldn't put that pressure on yourself. You just need to go out and play and enjoy playing and try to get better.
I spoke with a head coach last night of a program that had a remarkable season last year, and everybody is returning, including the conference player of the year. And they've struggled a little bit out of the gate. And we talked about why that might be. It's one thing to go after something. It's another thing to think we've got to defend something. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we talked about was somehow going through some symbolic ceremony of burning a piece of paper or whatever to say, last year has no bearing on who this group is and what's before them. Right. I know the answer to this question, but I want you to talk about it. What's Tom Hilbert's talent? What you do a couple of things at an exceptional level every year, and they aren't necessarily things that people associate right off the bat with coaching.
Yeah.
What's your talent?
Well, I think my ability to run a program overall and create a program that people feel like has value, and to connect a program to a community. I have really been the person in the forefront of that at CSU since 1997. And, you earn support and fans, one administrator at a time, one fan at a time, and your whole team does it. And I think that we've done a really good job of that. And so we've created a situation where our volleyball team isn't just, the kids on our roster and our coaches. Our volleyball team is everybody who plays a role in it. Our volleyball team is everybody in this community who's been a season ticket holder for 15 years. These people are part of our program. And I think that's one of the appeals of coming to CSU. It's how we attract talent, and it's how we get our players motivated every day. So I really believe that I'm pretty good at that kind of a situation. And I think this program and this city allows that to happen.
Yeah, it's a community that people would like to come to. When you came to Colorado State, Jim Stone, who was at Ohio State, was interested in the position. John Cook, who was at Wisconsin, was interested in the position. And it's probably the quality of life that Fort Collins offers. Mm-hmm. Every head coach is charged with creating situations where their players are uncomfortable. There's no growth without being uncomfortable. How does, you could choose to not be uncomfortable. You said, I'm entering my 60s. I've done this for a lot of years. How do you make yourself uncomfortable? How can you continue to grow?
Well, I've always been the person who creates, I'm a high anxiety person anyway. And I think that makes me worry. And sometimes I try to use worry to my advantage. I think that you have to constantly look at your team and evaluate and say, what are the reasons that we were successful in the previous year, and how can we enhance that? How can we leverage strengths? And then how can we work on the things we're not great at and either recruit to make those better or really improve it within our own team? And I think you have to believe that there is some space we need to fill here. There's some direction we need to go in order to be successful. You convince yourself that you aren't where you want to be. And that's how I make myself uncomfortable. I'm constantly worried about, we're not going to be as good as we used to be. And so it just motivates me to continue to.
But how do you grow?
Well, okay, that's a good question. Number one, talking to people and mentors like you help me, because you need people around you who can observe things that you don't see, who will tell you the truth about them. And I think that's really important. I think that talking to other coaches, even of other sports, is really important. I've learned, actually, sometimes I think I've learned more from coaches from other sports than I have from coaches of volleyball. I think that, I look at numbers a lot, and then I go and talk to other people across there. There are 4 or 5 coaches across the country that I really trust with regards to analysis and analytics, who can help me understand some areas in that sort of realm that help me grow. And then I try to do professional development as well.
Mhm. And you've been, one of the things I really respect, you've been pretty open about your own anxiety as the season progresses.
Mhm.
Um, and and one of the challenges that success brings, consistent success brings, you've never had a bad season. You've never gone through what most coaches go through, to kind of put things in perspective.
Mhm.
So is uh, how do you get better at that? How do you get better at dealing with worry? How do you get better at setting that aside so that during the most critical time of the season, you can be at your best?
Well, okay, so I would say the things that I've tried to do in the last several years. I've tried, to get into mindfulness and meditation. I think that's really important. I've tried to um, change my mindset um, in matches where I give a lot more responsibility for in-game management to assistant coaches. And I just sort of look back and try to look at trends and try to look at what the opponent is doing game plan wise and that kind of thing. And then I focus primarily on just my communication with the setter during a game. Sometimes we'll go through an entire match and that will be the only player I will talk to. So those are some of the things that I've done in the past 4 or 5 years that where I've tried to deal with my own anxiety and I think it really is important for coaches to not think that winning every single match is the only thing that makes you successful. Sometimes losing a match is particularly in a critical time of the season, or getting beat by an opponent that you should not have been beaten by. Sometimes those things motivate people and help people grow. And being able to, as a coach, accept that and walk away from it and go, well, it wasn't our day, but what can we learn from this? That's a healthy attitude to have. I think also being willing to play really good competition and understanding that you might not win that is helpful. I don't know. There's a number of ways.
Do you have any behaviors in terms of, let's say that you play a match against a team that normally you would beat, and mentally the team didn't have the right mindset and things didn't go well. Will you talk to the team after the match? Will you wait to the next day?
We generally talk for about 30 seconds at the end of a match. And I might make some summary statement, like it might be, you guys really competed well at the end of that. Good job. It might be, we won that match, but we really didn't play very well. Those kind of things. But I really won't go into any kind of diatribe or take them away from that environment. We go out and we meet in a circle at the end of the match for like 30 seconds, and then really we discuss what happened in that match at the beginning of the next practice, because that's when you really need to do it. There's no reason to, especially if it's negative, there'd be no reason to just chew a team out and let them sit on that for the rest, for 24 hours. I don't think that's productive.
Right. I would agree with that. Here's the second Jeopardy question. Well, the answer to this question is who is Tom Hilbert? The statement is, what will Tom Hilbert be doing when he leaves coaching?
I've thought about that a million times. And it is odd, because it's like I started coaching collegiate volleyball before I graduated from college. And it's the only job I've had. I'm now 61, almost 62 years old, right? So it is kind of scary to think about what I would do next. I think there are a lot of things I could do, but I sometimes think that I really just want to do things and enjoy some of the parts of life that are taken away from you as a coach, you know? So I might do nothing for a while and then try to just figure out during that break time what my next chapter would be. So anyway, I don't know. That's
I return to your talent. If when you retired from coaching, the athletic director or the university president came to you and said, Tom, we really admire what you've been able to do with volleyball. Can you help us create this same type of atmosphere in our other sports? Is that would that be a possibility?
I think it'd be a possibility. I think that, it's very interesting because as our athletic administration has changed at Colorado State, the people who are moving into those positions are not former coaches. And so I agree with you. I think I'd be very good at that, but I'm not sure that talent is recognized by those people, because I think they generally are people who have come up through sports marketing training, or they're attorneys, or they are, fundraisers and that kind of thing. I think that in the area of community building and fundraising, I would be very good for this university in general. I love living in Fort Collins, and I think that I know a lot of people here. So I really do think that might be better than just specifically honing in on athletics. But I do agree with you. I think community building is a talent of mine, and I could help and direct that in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind. I think want to go and find out. David Young is our producer. David, has anybody posted any questions that they would like Tom to speak to?
We've got no questions so far, Coach.
Well, Tom, you've done a great job.
Must be very thorough
in doing that.
Sorry, wait, there is one. I apologize.
Okay.
This is from Chip Maley. Ask the coach if he feels the schools who had a fall schedule have an advantage over teams with limited spring schedule, like baseball spring season before regular season.
I would say those schools okay, here's how I'd frame it. Those schools probably had just about as much practice as we've had. However, they had the opportunity to see their team compete against other teams, which allowed them to answer some questions that we haven't been able to answer yet. But, some of those schools who are only going to have limited matches in the spring that's going to hurt them. I think the ones that sort of finish the first half of their conference and then they're going to do the second half of their conference in the spring was probably the wise thing to do. And, they're going to have the advantage. But I think when it's all said and done, we're all going to be probably on an equal playing field.
All right. There's another one too from Terry. I'm going to mess up the name. Nuhar. How do you see the impact of COVID affecting the volleyball world as we move forward into the next couple of years, especially in the recruiting aspect, with some collegiate players electing to stay for additional seasons, high school seniors then being passed up for a scholarship or college opportunity? What's the trickle-down effect into the college bench players and the high school ranks? Well,
there's a whole bunch of things you just asked there. And
right.
It's really, it is a really important thing for people to look at. Number one, effectively what happened was we injected 25% more recruits into the recruiting pool, okay? Because these recruits are your own players redshirting or grad transfers who finish somewhere else and are going to move to another program. That is going to impact, and I'm just being honest here because I don't think people will like to hear this, but that's going to impact the 2021 to 2022 recruiting class in particular. more the 2022 class because we don't get what we call the super senior, which we will get now. If you want to keep the senior from this year into the 2021 year, and your school's willing to pay for it, that's the important thing. It's not like the NCAA has created money for you to do this. Your school has to pay for it. You can have 14 players on scholarship, but you're redshirting everybody on your team. So that's bound to impact the 2021, 2022 classes, maybe even on 2023. Now, then you look at, he asked about our rosters and that kind of thing. Well, we have 7 freshmen this year, 5 of them on scholarship. We have 2 freshmen next year. Okay, 1 of them on scholarship. So we have 9 players, 6 of them on scholarship that are essentially all in the same class now. So that whole group will, if they stay with us, will finish in 2024. I'll be retired by then. No, I'm kidding. That may or may not be true. But the fact is, you've just put a giant, bottleneck in your program. And so I'm not the only one who has to deal with this. There are a lot of programs that are going to have to deal with the same kind of situation. And the only solution is to try to divide it up either through redshirting your incoming 2021s, which will do a little bit of that, but also some of your players may have to graduate and leave early. And in a way, you're going to want to encourage that to happen in order to split those numbers up on your roster. That's the only solution. So it's really a strange time. And I do think that a lot of players will start looking at their future now and say, okay, I may love where I'm playing and love how my career's gone so far, but I've got an opportunity now to play 1 and maybe in some cases 2 years at a different school, work on a master's degree, change my environment. I think players are going to want to do that. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. And in a way, we've got to kind of let that happen in order to help us all manage our rosters.
Yeah, that's very good. It's a unique challenge. Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time today to be with us, and I wish you and your team good health this season. And it's going to be very interesting as we move toward a potential NCAA tournament in April. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Terry. Appreciate it.
Well, that was a fascinating interview, Terry. Tell me what the leadership takeaway from this episode is.
When I asked Coach Hilbert if trying to defend Colorado State's history of playing in 25 consecutive NCAA tournaments could create more anxiety for a coaching staff and a team, he replied, yes. The idea that this NCAA streak has to continue throughout my career is a big lie. My job is to go into practice every day and make people better. This is true for everyone during a pandemic. We have to have the mindset to focus on what's in front of us. There are several ways that you can support the podcast. If you go to the podcast app on your phone and choose Inside the Coaching Mind, click on Tap to Rate, and then write a review if you choose to. We also at terrypettit.com have a donate button, and you can support the podcast financially by purchasing books.
All right. Looking forward to our next episode. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you, David. You think we did that?